light within our hearts, light within our thoughts, light within our words. May one and all and everything, blessed and loved, ever be. Welcome. I am Sister Who. With me today on the show, I have my friend Samuel Nez, and we've been having a number of discussions about tribal ways of understanding and perceiving and relating. Today we wanted to focus on how all of that, how all of that would shape whatever future the tribe has, and I guess drawing from that also how some of these dynamics may be helpful to other people who are less familiar with tribal ways of resolving conflicts or building futures. So hopefully in the next half hour, as we barely scratch the surface of a complex topic again, we can share some things that can inspire people's own problem-solving skills.
So the first thing that comes to mind is, as of now, where any group of people are at, sometimes you're going to find problems. And I know from my own personal experience on the reservation, we do have a problem perceiving who we are now. and
there are reasons for that, but the point is, how do we address it?
Well, so now there's a depression, alcoholism, and drug abuse. But to resolve that conflict, I think would be to look at the culture.
Okay.
And that would work in any group or setting, indigenous, tribal. I mean, if you can go back and look at what worked, and take that and bring it here, I think that's what would help resolve that conflict now. Because I mean,
so a possible perception would be that someone who is reaching for addictive substances in order to cope with whatever is weighing on them, that one could describe that as a sort of inner emptiness. And if you fill that inner emptiness with cultural identity, then hopefully the inclination to reach for alcohol or drugs or something in order to forget how horrible life is, hopefully that would go away. And someone would offer you a cigarette and you say, don't need it. Someone would offer you some drugs or alcohol and you say, don't need it.
So one of the past things is remembering what one of the things that we should remember from our past and our, not necessarily our personal past, but our cultural past is, in my own research and such, is in almost every tradition, there is a reason for something positive, for something good, for something to live for, and to walk in a good way. In tribal discussion, that would be called the Red Road.
Okay. So it's like an understanding that may be collectively held by a people that may not be obvious within your own immediate family.
Exactly.
But it gives you a sense of cultural identity, a sense of purpose. For someone from, and I imagine everyone in Scotland is going to roll their eyes when I say this, for someone from Scotland whose family has become dysfunctional for a variety of reasons, they may find a way to fill the inner emptiness by wearing kilts and learning to play the bagpipes. Just something that would give a little bit of structure and focus and a little bit of cultural identity to their life, that they might not otherwise have. For a Native American on a reservation, okay, there's not a lot of money, there may not be lots of opportunities, but there is a way of seeing the world that doesn't require money, and that doesn't require, invitations from Hollywood agents or what have you. That even in this simple, uncomplicated environment of the reservation, they can re-embrace those practices and that self-discipline.
When I was on the reservation, and I would, there's no way of censoring it in any way. It's and there's no intent.
Censoring what?
How horrible it seemed to me, driving down a highway and seeing within, I don't know, 30 minutes at least, 2 drunken people passed out on the side of the road, or somebody that's going through problem.
So when you speak of something that's horrible, you're referring to the general practice of alcoholism.
Yeah, the general practice of alcoholism, or even drugs. I mean, if I don't see a bottle, for all I know, they could have used another substance that just.
But when you see somebody passed out along the road, you know something's wrong. But because of the abundance of alcoholism and drug abuse, you don't necessarily stop to help them.
It's so common that you don't. You wouldn't. A 20-minute drive to your house would probably turn into 3 hours.
Wow.
Just helping each individual, and to me that breaks my heart. But to
if you call the ambulance for everyone you see, there aren't enough ambulances.
Exactly. To resolve this kind of conflict and move forward, especially with interpreting and perceiving in a tribal way, to me, I mean, the only thing I would assume that could help them at that point would be the cultural identity, and that would work in any group or any setting. If instead of
But you have to talk to them when they're sober.
Oh, of course. I mean, they're not going to hear a word I say if they're under the influence. It's not going to mean anything. So you have to clean them up, or help them clean themselves up. You're not going to do the work for them, because, I mean, where's the lesson in that? But if somehow they can connect with the old ways, the good ways, I think instead of grabbing a bottle, why not grab a drum?
Mm-hmm.
To me, that makes more sense. And
so you might create a drum circle?
I possibly create a drum circle. Well,
which, when I say drum circle, there may be viewers who aren't familiar with that terminology, but it's a bunch of people who have drums or have drums they can share, and they meet somewhere, and somebody starts drumming, and someone else drums in a way that is complementary, and then another person joins in, and after a while you have a dozen drums or more going at the same time, and it makes this fascinating fabric of sound. It's really quite an amazing...
It almost draws you, and I shouldn't say it almost does, it kind of does draw you into a meditation.
Yeah, it's a very meditative practice that can, in fact, bring on this kind of opened, altered state of consciousness. And like there's no negative side effects, no chemicals, no harmful effects on your lungs or anything. But it's what some people might call a natural high.
And I used to, so to perspective, number of years back now, I would say, excuse me, I would say I was probably a really big stoner.
Okay.
I mean, I was under the influence.
Someone who uses marijuana extensively.
Yeah,
okay.
I was smoking marijuana all the time, and I was always high, and then unfortunately,
I have no judgment to offer, but no, I never have, because it never appealed to me.
But, you get so used to that kind of high, and then something changed in my life, and I don't need that anymore, and I would consider myself walking the pollen path of that red road. And that term is...
pollen path?
The pollen path. In Navajo tradition, corn pollen it's a very sacred thing, so to have a path that you're walking on, the red road is a sacred road in life, so it just shows that, you're moving towards something greater and to help others. It's a sacred path. It's like you're always in sacred space. But with me, that image of myself carried over with a number of people that I knew, and after I had realized that I want to walk this path, and I got all cleaned up, and I mean, I could say it was the flick of a switch. I went from this one character to who I am now.
Okay.
And I could say I did that in such a good way that, I mean, it wasn't even a transition, but people would be like, Sam,
what inspired you to make that choice?
I didn't feel like I was going anywhere.
So it was something that...
Cultural identity.
But was there a historical incident, the death of a loved one, or almost got killed in a car accident, or what have you, that basically was life grabbing you by the scruff of your neck and slapping your face and saying, "It's time to wake up"?
There were two instances. My school counselor had come to me and said I wasn't going to graduate high school
Okay.
unless I got unless I got myself together. And I have always been slightly intuitive throughout my whole life, but through one incident, I could not handle being high because whatever it was communicating with me. And since then, I have not been able to really get high from any other way except for in a natural state through.
Because one of the side effects of getting high was that your mental senses were more opened to where you couldn't shut out things that were trying to communicate with you that were intimidating?
In a sense, it was just very overwhelming, very overstimulating. And
Okay.
so with those two changes, one, it wasn't even about like all of a sudden I had a new perception of the world. They don't even want to call it ESP anymore. It's HSP because it's not an extra sense. It's a higher sense.
Okay.
So through one incident,
Higher sense perception.
through one incident, I all of a sudden my senses became extremely high
Mm-hmm.
while being high, and I did not like that. It was overstimulating, and so with that being said,
You didn't know how to handle it.
I didn't know how to handle it. But there were a number of things that helped me.
That served to wake you up.
Oh yes, it did. But after that incident, and with being connected to the world in a new way, I looked to my culture, and I had always grown up with it.
Okay.
With different things, but I had never practiced it. I had never really considered it something that would be a part of my life. And the second I picked up what I needed from my culture, that's when I feel like my life came together. I'm not gonna say that's gonna work for everybody else. I could stop on the side of the road and hand someone a drum.
Something different that works for each different person. Everybody, hopefully, there's something out there that will work for each person, but the same thing won't work for everybody. Going back to tribal possibilities as solutions that could be broadly applied, though, am I correct in my perception that most, if not all, Native American tribes had some equivalent, I guess, of the coming of age? I think I've heard it called a dream quest.
Oh, a vision quest, dream
Vision
quest, sometimes referred to as sitting on the hill.
Okay. But this was an experience that was built into tribal life that would put a young man or a young woman
In some cases, yes, a young woman.
into a situation where they would have an experience that was extremely challenging and in a sense a sort of wake-up call. That it was a ritual. The basic description I heard from one source had to do with 3 days of fasting and extreme physical exertion out in the wilderness by yourself or something.
Oh yeah, so it changed. Sometimes they'll drop you off on the mountain and say, "I'll see you in 5 days," essentially. And I'm not saying it's as rigid as that, but
if you go hungry for 5 days and exercise till you're ready to drop, it is completely understandable if you start having hallucinations.
oh yes, of course.
But the fact that it's a hallucination doesn't mean that it's meaningless. I mean, it may be the subconscious mind bringing things to the fore that you really do need to contemplate and deal with.
To me, it's when you're at your weakest, that's when you see the potential of your strongest.
Yeah. When the body weakens, the spirit is more obvious and more visible and more accessible.
And, to me, that's my own personal story, is I would say I was at my weakest, and next thing you know, I had a wake-up call. And that was in a non-traditional
But in your case,
setting.
it wasn't a vision quest.
No.
But it was a similar sort of effect.
Very, very similar. It's like, so with the NIC, which is the Native American Church,
Okay.
they perform or have what would be a peyote ceremony. And we would not consider peyote a drug.
Okay.
It would be considered a form of medicine, not as in medicine like antibiotics or anything, but a self-medicine. So like, would I wear my
An herbal tool?
well, not even like so an herbal tool, but I mean, my jewelry would be considered medicine because it's a spiritual tool to me in some sense. So
A spiritual energy to it.
yeah, there's a spiritual energy to it, and so peyote is not considered a drug, but a form of medicine because it has a spiritual energy to it.
Okay.
And again, they're in an altered state through the use of substance. And I mean, some people can use peyote to do that, and others don't have to.
But when they go into this altered state, it's not for purposes of euphoria or blissfulness or what have you. It's for purposes of spiritual focus.
Yes.
I mean, somebody asked me to define hedonism once, hedonistic, whatever, and I said, well, hedonism, as I defined it, would be all of the experience with none of the relationship and none of the meaning, where you want to feel the sensation, feel the pleasure, feel the whatever, but you specifically refrain from giving it any meaning, any context, any relationship to anything else in life. A holistic experience, on the other hand, has all the same sensations,
Mm-hmm.
but invites the mind to make the connections, which a peyote ritual or a vision quest seems like that's what it would be.
Mm-hmm.
You're putting the body and the mind and the emotions into a place where they're under pressure, and they're going to respond just by the nature of the context. But you're specifically framing it with the support of the tribe and the leadership,
Mm-hmm.
so that there's a relationship and a focus and a goal and
There's
a purpose
something to back it up.
to back it up from every side.
Mm-hmm.
So it's not like you're floundering on your own.
So that, to me, that's a tribal way of working towards something greater and resolving conflict. I mean, tribal sense applies to all people, as long as there's something to back it up or something to support it. I should say support. That sounds like a better word. I think there's any conflict that you can surpass.
Is it on the level of basic interpersonal conflicts? Everybody deals with those every day.
Mm-hmm.
Is that something that, if it were to occur within a tribal setting, they could expect tribal support for, we're all going to form a circle and the two of you are going to sit there in the middle and talk it out until you come to an agreement? For example, I mean, I don't know if it's quite that basic or crude, but some sense in which the tribal elders or somebody would listen and watch and, have them talk it out until it was resolved?
I'm reminded of the movie Dances with Wolves.
Okay.
So Kevin Costner leaves his hat out in the field, and one of the other Plains Indians finds his hat, wears it, and they're all in this group setting and everything. And you have my hat. And he's, you didn't want it, you left it out in the field. And so there's conflict.
Uh-huh.
But there are, and that reminds me of that because they're surrounded by everybody, and it gets really quiet. And they're looking at him, and one of the other natives stands up and says, that's his hat.
We've all seen it.
We've all seen it. And so, there's that brief moment, and you wonder, well, are they going to get into a physical fight? Are they going to get into a word fight? Or is there going to be some sort of resolve? But there's, everybody's watching.
Mm-hmm.
So then he hands him his knife, and...
Well, no, before that, though, the guy says, that's his hat. We've all seen it.
Yeah.
If you're going to take it, then obviously you have to give something in trade.
Exactly.
And as soon as he says that, everyone... I mean, I don't know if you see it, but it's like everyone goes, ha, because now we know it'll be resolved. Because he's provided a way for things to be rebalanced.
And to me, I thought it was a good trade. I was just saying, I thought it was a good trade. Knife for a hat.
It seemed fair enough to me.
But that's a good example of what you just said. I mean, if there's going to be conflict, I think it's best that there is a form of mediation and possible ways of solving the problem. That was just one incident.
And the mediator didn't require either one to experience loss. Exactly.
There was a gain, a trade, an equal trade, a gain of something new.
It was about the balance.
Mm-hmm.
It wasn't about, well, it's his hat, now give it back. End of subject. It was, I suppose at the very least it made sense that the other, that the warrior would be rewarded for having been considerate enough to retrieve the hat for him. Otherwise, it'd still be laying out on the plain someplace.
Right. He didn't give the hat because, I mean, if he would have just given the hat, then he would have been at a loss, and one person would have been at a gain, but because there was an equal trade, I mean, there was a gain in both senses. And to me, that's a great way of tribal interpretation of conflict. There should be a gain on both sides equal.
It seems I'll say Western, but European, I'm not really even, it's not even just Europe though, but the contrasting industrial age pattern, I guess, is more often the kind of winner take all. Who's the winner and who's the loser? We decide in your favor or that, instead of saying it needs to be both.
It's like when two people are at so much of an argument, and you don't see any point of somebody winning. There's either going to be a winner or there's going to be a loser. To me, it's like, what about the term? Why don't we just agree to disagree? There's an agreement that's gained by both, and discussion over. It can come up at another time and more appropriate time.
The caveat I'll add though is that agree to disagree doesn't always work.
Oh no, it doesn't.
There are some things that you can't agree to disagree that someone is going to be penalized and someone is going to get the better part. I want to come in and conquer your country. We'll just have to agree to disagree because I'm coming in. But no, that's not what agree to disagree means.
No.
Agree to disagree expects the same sort of balance and fairness that tribal systems generally include.
So tribal ways of perceiving and interpreting and resolving conflict along the way. I think that term right there, fairness.
Fairness and balance.
And
harmony.
That is a tribal
one of our discussions,
concept.
You mentioned something about the importance of listening.
Mm-hmm.
And I forgot to mention at the time that as a tribal principle of relationship, it doesn't just apply to humans. It's not just other people. It's also listening to the seasons and listening to the animals and listening to the weather and listening to the land and listening to everything. Listening to the whispers you hear in your heart. The things that are even beyond sound. It's listening is that openness to everything, pretty much.
Fairness to what lives on the land and the land itself.
Okay. And listening to what it needs.
Mm-hmm. And we don't do that anymore.
Well, it's high time we start.
Yeah, it is.
High time we start. We've just got a few minutes left. Other tribal dynamics that you really wish non-tribal people knew, because watching the way the world behaves looks so absurd and so ridiculous and so self-sabotaging, I imagine. Aren't there lots of times where you look at how non-Native Americans act and you just want to slap your forehead and, geez, I wish they knew what in the world they were doing? What is it that you would want them to know? What are some examples?
Well, just going back to fairness, I mean, one of the things is my way is the right way and it's the only way. There's always more than one right way. And that's definitely a tribal concept, is there's always more than one right way. There's...
I don't remember. It seems to me somebody said it was, just popped in my head, so maybe it's supposed to be included right now. Somebody was mentioning about an annual meeting of the Iroquois, I'm not sure, where they would come and they would tell stories around the fire, and the introduction was, all of these stories are true, and some of them actually happened. And I just thought that was a fascinating distinction to make. That to stop being so chained to historical truth and understand that there is spiritual truth and relational truth and emotional truth, that doesn't necessarily require uh, an historical event to be associated with it.
Exactly.
I thought it was brilliant, but that's the only context in which I've ever heard that idea.
Well, it would make sense to me, and that's it's not the only right way, because some of them occurred and some of them didn't. But who's to say that they're both wrong? They're wrong either way. I'd like to know which ones are true, but or which ones actually occurred, I should say.
Which ones are historically true?
Which ones are historically true? But all the same, I mean, if I interpret it in a good way that helps me out, maybe I don't need to know the historical truth.
Well, and it seems to me that being open to the broader truth makes you open to the meaning of all the fairy tales and folk tales and the legends that are repeated around campfires and so forth. And did they ever actually happen or not? I don't know, but I'm not sure it matters. What matters is what we learn from them and how we live our lives because of having heard the story.
I think that's it right there, is openness. That is definitely a tribal concept. It's a global concept as well, but it's not always practiced.
Do you think a lack of openness has something to do with the problems being experienced on the reservation?
Yes.
So it might be a good place to start literally everywhere.
Yep.